Welcome back to the Junkman's Garage. I'm the Junkman, and today we're going to learn how to measure a cylinder and the little end bearing when we're doing a top end. Before you start this process, you're going to need a few special tools that not everybody might have in their toolbox. First, a set of calipers. These plastic ones are going to get you close. They're not real accurate. They're only, go in increments of 1 millimeter, which we're going to be needing to be a little bit finer than that. Or actually, this one actually goes in 0.5 millimeter, which that's even finer than most of them. However, the better option would be a pair of these digital calipers. They're much more precise and go down to a finer measurement. There's also kinds that have a dial indicator on here. Just zero it out, and then when you open it up, you read the dial to get close. I have a pair, but they're only in SAE, and today we're going to be in metric for the part we're going to measure. And for measuring the diameter of your cylinder, you're going to need these bore gauges here, or actually they're for measuring anything cylindrical inside. And what they are is they're spring loaded, so you stick it down in there, tighten the little set screw, holds the measurement, and then you can take your calipers, measure it, and then compare with what the service manual says for what your specifications are. You can find these at most tool stores, of course online, about $15, $20, maybe even a little bit cheaper. However, they do actually make a bore measuring tool which has a dial indicator, and you can just run it up and down in there. Those are more expensive, and if this is something you do a lot, I would invest in those. They're going to be $60 to $100, maybe even over $100 for a really good set. But for the average person, doing it this way will get you just as accurate as that for a lot less money. Well, we're about ready to make our measurements, but the first things first, you have to have a service manual to do this. You're just wasting your time to try to do it without these. Why? Because how are you going to know what the specifications are without the service manual? Either one. This is a factory style, and this is obviously an aftermarket Climbers brand, but either of them, they're going to have the specifications in there. They're going to tell you where and how to take your measurements, where in the cylinder. And it doesn't matter. I'm working on some 2-stroke cylinders here, but this is applicable to 4-stroke motorcycles as well, because they all measure the same way. It's just that the dimensions are going to be different. So stop the video now, get yourself a service manual before you go forward, because there's no reason to measure it if you don't know what the specifications are. Okay, we're ready to measure here. I got a printout of the service manual. It gives me the specifications, the range it's supposed to be in, and the service limit. And we're going to measure like this, and then down into the cylinder. So we'll take a measurement here. Get this fairly centered. You want to keep it perpendicular to get the most accurate reading. So if you have the dial indicator, you can just stick it in there and watch it on the gauge here. And that's what you can also do here is measure just in the same spot all the way around, kind of spin it in there, take it out, turn that back on. I have it set to the minimum spec, and we're in there, and boy, we're right on. So this cylinder really actually, and like I said, you can see I've already measured it, but it is, at least at this point, it is still at the factory specification at 68 millimeters. But without moving our gauge, we'll move it farther down the cylinder and see, and it should get looser, because obviously as the cylinder wears, and it's going to taper just a little bit. And we're going to go down just above the ports. That's one other place the service manual says, and it's probably have a hard time seeing, but it's a little loose there. So we'll undo our set screw on the top, tighten it up, pull it out, and it's pretty much the same. Let's do the crossways. Oh wow, okay. We're just above the exhaust port, and I can tell it's wore here a little bit, but I don't think it's out of spec. but we're just right above the exhaust port. Do that. Put it in there, and yeah, it's going to want to move the gauge just ever so slightly. Yeah, 0.01, not much, but that's that way. That's within spec for tolerance for out around, and that's expected with a used cylinder. Now we're going to go down below the ports and do the same thing. And I had to loosen it up, so this is going to be a little bit bigger gap. Let's measure it crossways now too while we're at it, because that's the farthest down we can do. And it feels about the same too, but it ain't too wore out really, actually, this cylinder. And actually it fits right in there just the same. So our limits here are 68 millimeters even to 68.019, or almost 0.2. So we're well within the standard service limit, so we could put a standard piston and ring set back in here. And just judging by the looks of this, I mean, I ran a home quickly through here just to clean it up and washed it out with some warm soapy water. I mean, you can see just a little bit of cross-hatching and wear just right at the top, which is normal. It's just some carbon probably embedded in there. Clean it up more, that'll go away. But our measurements, both this way, all through the cylinder, show that this is standard and suitable for reuse. Probably just do some more homework to put a good finish on there. Put a standard piston and ring in there, and you're good to go. Now, however, not showing you in this video, you need to check your ring gaps when you're doing that. All right, let's move on to this other cylinder. It's a different story. Okay, got this other cylinder here, and of course, obviously I've done this before, so you're already going to see what the outcome is, but I'll show you how to measure this one too. This one has been overbored once, and it's going to be hard to see in here, but this one does have a little bit of scoring. This will need to be cleaned up by a machine shop. Not something you can do at home. Honing will not take out what you see in there, which is probably not visible in the camera here, but trust me, when you run your finger, there's just a teensy bit of rough spot that, while you could probably get away with the new piston and rings, and they wear in kind of funny, they're not going to last that long in this kind of cylinder. But either way, we're going to measure, and I'll show you that we're going to be closer to that service limit without being over, because this one, I believe, could just be cleaned up, maybe overboard to the second overbore, because as you can see, I've measured this before, and this cylinder has already been bored once. So we put it on our, and as you can see, it doesn't want to fit in there, so we're going to have to move our calipers a little. And we're 68.5, right at the proper opening for the first over, or 0.5 millimeter over, which is mentioned here in the service manual instructions here. But our service limit is 68.1, so we're 0.5 millimeter away from that, which is the second overbore. So this wouldn't necessarily need to be if it didn't have a little bit of scuffing here, which would have to be cut out of there, and would probably need the second overbore specifically. But measuring both ways, we have, it's about the same here, and we're going to go down this way, get right above the ports, readjust, stick it in there. Thing is see, we're just above the ports. See, it's just a little bit more worn out as we go down the cylinder. So this one, if I was going to use this cylinder, I would definitely be going on the second overbore. But it could be used if it could be cleaned up on a first overbore, but I wouldn't recommend it. But anyway, hopefully that shows you a little bit how to measure a cylinder, so you know what you're putting in it. Because most people, how are you going to tell 0.5 millimeter oversized on this or even if it wasn't a little bit scored up like I'm seeing here, you put a standard piston in this, well, it'll run. You're going to have some heavy piston slap. The rings, you're going to have low compression because the piston ring gap will be too wide. For one thing, if you stick your rings in there and measure that gap, it'll be out of spec. But you know what? If you just dump parts in this, sure, it'll run, but not for very long. Now that you know how to measure your cylinder properly, let's measure the small end of the rod to see if it's reusable. Much like measuring the cylinder, measuring the rod is the same way, although we just have to use a smaller gauge. And squeeze it, put it in there, get it as centered as you can. Tighten up the little set screw, and then measure it the other way. Of course, you don't want to get on the oiling hole there, and it should slide in and out about the same the whole way. And if it does, that means it's generally pretty round. It wore pretty evenly. You don't want too much play. And then we'll go to our calipers and check our measurements, see if we're within spec. Okay, as you can see here, I have my caliper set up at 22, tipped over to 1, but we'll have to see. And we'll fit it in there. Slides in there real nice. I can actually squeeze on it and get to the exact 22. Our range is 22.003, which we don't quite go out. That's why it's bouncing around 1 and 2, to 22.014, which is quite a bit ways out. So what it's telling me here, and we checked our squareness or roundness of the rod end, what it's telling me is this rod end is suitable for reuse because it's hardly worn from the factory specifications, as we're seeing here. So a standard bearing and pin can go right back in there and you'll have no play issues. If it was outside of this spec or outside of the service limit, you'd need to replace the whole rod. To my knowledge, there's no sleeves available for these kinds of engines. On 4-strokes, sometimes there is, so you can save tearing the crank apart. But in this case, it's reusable. Well, I hope you learned something from this video on how to at least measure your cylinder and the small rod end when you're evaluating, doing a top end or evaluating some used parts like I have here to see if they're suitable for reuse. To get started with these tools, these are fairly inexpensive. I'd say I have maybe $30 wrapped up in these tools here. Of course, I do this semi-often, so I mean, they paid for themselves, but if this was your first time, about $30 in tools. But the first thing you actually have to do, and I don't understand why people don't buy them, is the service manuals. Factory one or an aftermarket one. Either one is going to have these specs that I showed you here for your particular application. 2 or 4-stroke. I demonstrated on 2-stroke, same as on a 4-stroke. These aftermarket things can be had for like $25 to $30, and there's more than just the specifications in here. There's everything you need to know about your motorcycle in here. Factory one is probably best, but not required. The aftermarkets are just fine. Don't always trust the information on the internet, because you don't know where it's coming from as far as these specifications. But anyways, share and like this video. Let me know in the comments section what you think. Like I said, this isn't a comprehensive video on doing a top end. This is just a couple of measurements that you have to do. There's obviously the ring gap and measuring the piston and a whole host of other measurements you need to do. And that's why you need the service manual. So anyway, like me on Facebook, check out my website, like this video, share and subscribe, and thanks for watching.